what exactly is happening here, and will it turn the tide? Is NATO going to be able to turn the tide in Ukraine, given that it seems like the battlefield situation has either been stagnant or in Russia's favor for quite some time now?
Well, I mean, it is very hard to tell because when, say, the most recent U.S. Military aid package to Ukraine, when they announce this, there are things that they can send immediately and that Ukraine can start using immediately, like 155 millimeter artillery ammunition. But then they have things like these Stryker armored personnel carriers. The Stryker armored vehicle, it's a wheeled armored vehicle. I'm sure people are familiar with them if they were following the U.S. Occupation of Iraq. They used those quite extensively there. And there's many variants, but the variant they decided to send to Ukraine is just it has a 50 caliber machine gun on it, and it drives around on the battlefield. It has light armor, and it's vulnerable to pretty much everything except small arms fire, which, I mean, the type of weaponry that Russia is going to be firing at these on the battlefield is going to be much more significant than small arms fire. So what it is a system that Ukraine has not used yet, and then they're going to have to learn how to use it, how to maintain it, how to sustain it on the battlefield. It is serving the role as armored personnel carrier, along with all of these other types of equipment that the U.S. and its allies have sent. They have sent the M113. There was like a Dutch variant of that. They've got British and other European armored personnel carriers. They're all different. They have different engines, different transmissions, different wheels, different types of track systems. It is such a hodgepodge of equipment, probably dozens, if not scores, of vehicles serving the armored personnel carrier role alone. And then how do we figure out when that's actually going to get to Ukraine? We have no idea, because they have to train Ukrainians on how to use it before they send it. So this is what makes it so hard to keep track of these announcements. And like you said, recently, since the new year, they have been announcing larger and larger quantities of weapons. And what it looks like they're trying to do is just throw weapons at the problem. The problem is Ukraine is losing huge amounts of men and equipment on the battlefield every single day. Their offensives ground to a halt. They threw a huge amount of men and equipment at Russian defenses, and they ground to a halt. And they're back to where they started before the offensives, which was falling back, losing a city here, losing a city there. I think a lot of people are looking at the situation around Bakhmut. I was just reading a BBC article where they admit that Ukraine now has announced that it has lost Soledar, but they're going to do a counterattack and take it back soon. So just wait. But they also admit that Bakhmut is at risk of being encircled, and you can look at even the pro-Ukrainian life maps that indicate that that is the case. So how is that happening? I thought HIMARS, M777, all of these weapon systems, I thought that turned the tide. I thought the Javelin and the Stinger missiles, they turned the tide. So how is it that we're right back to where we started again? And now they're going to throw more weapons at the problem. And Danny, I'm sure you were following the proxy war in Syria. This is exactly what they did there. They just threw weapons. They had all of these training programs inside Syria, outside Syria. And then it eventually crept toward U.S. military intervention directly. That's what I'm afraid is going to happen regarding Ukraine. It's incredibly dangerous. It was incredibly dangerous in Syria. Russia and Syria and Iran and Hezbollah, they managed that escalation very well. But in Ukraine, it's a different matter, because this is just the Russian military itself in Ukraine. There are no proxies for the West to fight with or through if they decide to intervene directly. So I hope that's a good overview. I could get into the details of the different weapon packages, and I could talk about all of the problems of the Leopards. It just depends on what you want to know.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like the Leopard 2 tanks, especially, you hear Ukrainian officials over and over and over again say, tanks, give us tanks. Like, we need the tanks. And they're even saying now, I think it was Zelensky who said about Ramstein, this defense contact, the air base that they're meeting in Germany. He said, let this be the meeting of tanks that leads to then the meeting of F-16s and then the meeting of long-range missiles, right? Basically what he's saying is, let this be the moment where Ukraine gets everything it wants and thus allowing it to win this conflict. Is there any realistic basis to that? Like, could that ever be a possibility? Because it just seems like every time NATO throws weapons at Ukraine since February of last year, it's led to some progress. Like you mentioned Kherson in your videos and Kharkov, but then as you said just now, they threw everything at those battles, and it didn't really change the overall direction of this war. So do you feel like the same thing, this is going to happen again if Ukraine gets these weapons? Like, will it actually, if let's say they get everything they want after this meeting, these tanks, would it change the outcome of this conflict, or change at least the direction of it?
No, it's just going to drag it out longer, get more people on both sides killed, more thoroughly destroy Ukraine. The problem is, even if NATO were to fight Russia directly, Western military analysts recognize that Russia has a very formidable anti-access area denial capability. They have a premier integrated air defense system. They have all of these long-range missiles and rocket systems, guided, unguided, multiple launch rocket systems, and they have a huge amount of artillery. So this allows them to create a layered defense that is extremely difficult for even NATO to punch through. And that the whole concept of modern warfare is, it's not just about single weapon systems on the battlefield, is how they all operate together, and not just the combat side of it, but also the logistics and the sustainment side of everything. Your ability to continuously send ammunition, fuel, spare parts out to the field, your ability to bring vehicles in from the field, repair them, and send them back as quickly as possible. Whichever side can organize and coordinate all of these different moving pieces the best, they are the ones who are going to win. And Ukraine cannot do that with equipment they've never touched before, that they're just going to get a crash course on and try to use. And if we want an example of Ukraine incorporating military equipment, foreign military equipment properly, and it's still not making any difference, just look at the Bayraktar TB2 drone. They made the deal with Turkey years ago, and then over the last couple of years, they had Turkey come in and train Ukrainians. They test flew them. They established the infrastructure they needed to support them in Ukraine. And this happened over the course of several years. And then when the Russian special military operation began, they started shooting them out of the sky, and they had to keep asking Turkey to send more until they stopped. I haven't heard anything about the Bayraktar TB2 in a long time. Have you, Danny?
No, no, not at all. Not at all.
And so that is an example of, and the TB2 is not a bad weapon system. It's just not capable of doing what they wanted it to do, which was take out Russian forces that are protected by a world-class integrated air defense system. And so that doesn't matter what else you send to Ukraine. You send tanks. Tanks are supposed to go into battle supported by aircraft, both helicopters and warplanes, supported by a significant amount of artillery and infantry, with infantry fighting vehicles on the battlefield. And these are all supposed to be forces that are well-trained, crews with years of experience operating these vehicles, not just individually, but collectively in their unit. There's absolutely no way for Ukraine to do that. It's impossible. And it was exactly like the US and their allies thinking they're going to create an army out of thin air in Jordan, in Turkey, and send them into Syria and defeat the combined forces of the Syrian Arab Army, the Russian Federation, Iran, and Hezbollah. It just was unrealistic. And look at how it's unraveling. And we're looking at the exact same situation in Ukraine right now. It doesn't matter what they send. It's not plausible to send sophisticated, complex, modern weapons to a country in the middle of a war who has never used them before and expect them to use them effectively on the battlefield. It's impossible.
Yeah, and I mean, Ukraine is, you say it over and over again, and I say it over and over again on this channel. Ukraine was a proxy. Ukraine was I don't think Ukraine was ever supposed to get into a conflict like this, but this is what happened. And now it seems like Ukraine, of course, is definitely paying the consequences. And this conflict I think this conflict has turned the tide in the other direction. It may not be, the kind of quick and resound kind of turn that I think people, especially who watch our channel, would hope for, right? It's not going to end anytime soon, given that these weapons only prolong the situation. But I was thinking about the situation in Bakhmut because I was watching your coverage and some others' coverage, and looking at that map, that live Ukrainian army map, and it seems like Russia is in the process of encircling Bakhmut, and it could fall very soon. This is after the Soledar victory for Russia in recent weeks. What would be the significance of Bakhmut falling to Russia? Because I think what we see in the Western media often is not only are these weapons hyped as the potential for turning the tide, but then you also have a minimization of any progress that Russia makes on the battlefield, either through just omitting and playing down the situation, or when covering it, saying, well, this actually doesn't matter that much because we're going to make sure that Ukraine gets what it needs and that it will be able to wage some kind of offensive later this winter or the spring. What do you think would be the significance of Bakhmut falling to Russia? Seemingly, it seems it could be any moment now in the next several weeks.
Yes, I think people should keep in mind that Russia has said, and this is just what they're saying. They're saying that their primary objective is demilitarizing Ukraine. The commanders around Bakhmut on the Russian side, they have said that this is about drawing in Ukrainian forces and eliminating them. And they want to encircle Bakhmut, not necessarily to take the city, although, why not? But the idea of encircling the city is to trap as many forces inside as possible, to prevent them from withdrawing, and then to press them into positions that are less defendable, where they'll lose even more forces if they try to stand and fight. This is the whole process. And Russia has no problem moving the line of contact forward as long as they don't stretch it out longer. One of the benefits of leaving Kherson City and crossing the Dnieper River was they shortened the line of contact and they concentrated more forces along it, which gives them an advantage when you're trying to concentrate firepower and destroy as much of the enemy as possible. So this is the concept on the Russian side. On the Ukrainian side, Bakhmut, Soledar, Seversk to the north, and Avdiivka outside of Donetsk, all the way to the south of Bakhmut. If you look on a map, it is a line. It is a defensive line that Ukraine has built up over several years. These are defensive positions that you cannot just create overnight. They are time tested. They are battle tested. There was all of that fighting taking place, even if it was less intense, during the attempted implementation of the Minsk agreements. But they're not going to be able to fall back and build another defense line like that. So once Ukraine loses that defense line, which is why I suspect they're trying to hold. I mean, of course, there's the optics. They have to create the illusion that they're winning, so they don't want to just fall back. But at the same time, if they lose Bakhmut, Soledar, Seversk, Avdiivka, these are fortified cities that they're not going to be able to fall back to another city as fortified as these were. So that is the problem on the Ukrainian side. And then the other problem is we were told that, you know, they have HIMARS. Not even a single HIMARS launcher has been destroyed. This is what the Western media keeps saying, that Russia's making that up. And yet, if that is the case, and HIMARS was doing so much damage to Russia's rear, their supply lines were decimated, they had no ability to supply troops in the front lines. How is this happening? How is this happening? So this is the smoke screen of success that they've tried to create, blowing away in the winds of battle around Soledar and Bakhmut.